Ms. Nidhi Goyal, who's the member of the FICCI Task Force on Diversity and Inclusion, and also the founder and executive director of Rising Flame, which is, and she's also the part of the core group of PWD NHRC India, and of course our task force. Nidhi works a lot with, not only on issues of disability, specifically on women with disability, with youth. Nidhi, we are very proud to have her with us to moderate this session. I would also like to welcome all our panelists, Mr. Nipun Malhotra from Nipun Foundation, who's also the chair of the subgroup on empowering people with disabilities of the FICCI Task Force on Diversity and Inclusion. We have with us Mr. Apurv Kulkarni, who's Associate Director of the Ola Mobility Institute and also a member of the FICCI Task Force on Diversity and Inclusion. At 4 o'clock, we'll be joined by Mr. Vikas Prasad, who's the Director at the Department of Empowerment of People with Disabilities, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Government of India. We also have with us today Mr. Shadi Abu Zahara, from joining us from Vienna, who works on accessibility strategy, and he's a technology specialist on W3C. Ms. Krishnakumari, who's a special educator and rehabilitation professional and project associate at Tara Vidya Sagar, and Mr. Parag Gupta, who's the head of the Amazon Devices India. So before I invite Mr. Nipun Malhotra to make the welcome address, I will now, I thank you once again, everybody, all the participants and our esteemed panelists to join on the FICCI webinar today. And over to you, Nidhi, for starting the session. Nidhi? Yeah.
Hi, sorry. I think between the back-end technical team and I trying to unmute myself, we kept muting me again and again. So
no worries. Happens all the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Umaji, for welcoming all the participants. And thank you everyone for joining us today for this very important conversation on Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Really a day in the month of May every year that we sort of celebrate, sort of reflect on, and think about what access really means to people living with disabilities, people living with diversities, you know, this digital world that we talk about, which is open to all, which has brought so much excitement in our life, and probably at this point, in this crisis or pandemic, it's really the way of connecting, the way of, if you're privileged enough to have digital access, you really see that's the go-to solution. And so in these current times, what does it even mean for us to talk about Global Accessibility Awareness Day? And you know, I always, on this day, I have mixed feelings. As a person with a disability, as a woman with a disability and a disability rights activist, I have mixed feeling about this Awareness Day, because which means that we're still talking about making people aware. But then I step back and I say, okay, but we're talking about access for all. So that's really exciting. Before I introduce the subject and why did we choose sort of inclusive technologies for a COVID and post-COVID world, I'd like to invite Nipun, who Umaji has introduced, a dear friend and colleague, Nipun Malhotra, CEO, Nipun Foundation, and the chair of the subcommittee EPWD of the D&I Task Force by FICCI. Nipun, can you just set the context with some opening remarks? Inviting you here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nidhi, and thank you to everybody who's logged in today for our second webinar, Nidhi as a Disability subgroup. I think today is a very special day, as both Umaji and Nidhi mentioned, the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And considering the entire world has gone online because of the virus, we thought, why not talk about accessibility also from an online perspective? For all those who attended our first webinar, we did touch upon technologies and how they can be made accessible. When Nidhi, of course, spoke from a disabled person's perspective, we had Karishma from Microsoft, who also touched upon what Microsoft is doing in terms of accessibility. But I think we were really only touching the tip of the iceberg, really, in that sense, when it comes to accessibility and technology. Today, we have the privilege of having some fantastic speakers who will be speaking in more detail about how both how technology is becoming accessible and us providing opportunities to persons with disabilities, but also what is the scope in the future and where we are headed I'm going to briefly introduce the panel, and then I'm going to hand over to Nidhi to facilitate the entire session. One of our first speakers is Apoorv Kulkarni, who's the Associate Director, Ola Mobility Institute, and he's also a member of a FICCI Disability Task Force. Apoorv is a dear friend of mine. He's a chartered accountant. He's a Stanford MBA. He's doing a lot of fantastic research at Ola Mobility Institute on the mobility of the future. But I think more important than that, he's also a person with a disability who's very tech savvy. He's one of the most tech savvy people I've met in my life. So, Apoorv, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to your perspective, both as Associate Director, Ola Mobility Institute, and as a user of technology. We have Shadi Abou Zara, who's the Accessibility Strategy and Technology Specialist at W3C Vienna, Austria. Uh, I think we're going to learn a lot from her on web accessibility standards, what they mean, where does India stand, what can the government and the private sector do to universalize web accessibility standards in India, and really benchmark India compared to the rest of the world. Krishnakumar, who's a special educator at Vidyasagar, is also going to talk about education and perhaps how technology can be used in education, especially for people with intellectual disabilities. I know that there's a lot of concern amongst persons with disabilities and the parents with education shifting online due to the lockdown and people being restricted to their households. And a lot of people do not have access to special educators, one to one, the teachers one to one, etc. But technology can, of course, be a great enabler. And we're going to learn from her what role can technology play, not only now, but in the future, in the classroom of the future too. We also have Parag Gupta. Parag is a graduate from BITS Pilani and an MBA from Kellogg School of Management. He has a bunch of patents to his name and have a long profile of his that I'm not really going to read in detail here, but I'm also going to but what I'm going to tell you instead is that Amazon is doing some excellent work through the devices to empower persons with disabilities. I myself have an Amazon Echo at home and I use it to control, as a person with a locomotor disability, I use it to control everything ready in my room, from switching on my TV to switching off my TV to electricity, etc. And now I'm not dependent on my parents to call them to switch off my lights when I sleep at 3 o'clock at night. So thank you so much, Parag, for all the innovations you're doing and you're making life easier for us. We also have two sign language interpreters in Surbhi and Saurabh. So thank you so much for joining us, Surbhi and Saurabh. And over to you, Nidhi. And I look forward to the next 1.5 hours. We of course have Vikas Prasad also will be joining. Mr. Vikas Prasad, who's the Director, Ministry of Social Justice, will be joining us later to tell us what the government is doing. That's at 4 o'clock. And Nidhi will be facilitating the session. So over to you, Nidhi.
Thank you so much, Nipun. We really have indeed a very interesting mix of speakers. And for global accessibility, I just want to start with very basic thoughts around, there are people with disabilities who are participants. There are hopefully businesses, industry leaders also listening to us here, and really other civil society members. And I often get asked saying, but online is open to everybody. So what do you mean by online access? And that's a very interesting question because access for all is not a concept that is so commonly spoken about, and particularly in a space where access for just blind individuals and deaf individuals could be so different, right? I would need more of verbal cues as a blind person. Somebody would need more of imagery and visual cues. And so when access needs also kind of feel or look contradicting, or contrary to each other or contrasting, and then what is this whole thing around, oh, let's have access for all? Why do we keep saying that when the digital world is open? And it was a very interesting conversation I was having. And I said, okay, when I say physical world and access for all, the world is anyway open. So why are we even talking about access? And they said, no, but we need ramps for people who are on wheelchairs. And I said, no, we need much more than ramps for people. And ramps are not just for people who are on wheelchairs. Young children use the ramps, pregnant women use the ramps, elderly use the ramps, and so on and so forth. Just someone with chronic fatigue uses ramps. So when we talk about access, it really comes from a perspective of access for all, and the world just does not become accessible on its own. So the digital world, very similarly, just by the virtue of being open and available, is not sort of accessible for all. And what this really means and how businesses and others could achieve this kind of access, how we could engage with access and accessibility online. Particularly today, all of us are saying, oh, the new normal is going to become this. We are all going to be working from home, as if all of us have the option to work from home. beyond that, even then, just to think about, what this new world will look like, or just being the architects of this new world and being very conscious and taking best practices which already exist, or sort of issue problem areas considering that already exist, and so that we are conscious that we're not mirroring those problems going forward or mimicking them in the online world, would be extremely important. With these opening thoughts, I'd really like to invite our first speaker, Shari, if I may invite you. Thank you so much for joining us from Vienna, and agreeing to be on this call. If you could tell us a little, Shari, about what really, what's the importance of this digital access, what it looks like, how do people even achieve this? So even before we hear sort of some best case studies and some apps and platforms that are already accessible or are thinking about access, if we can hear from you the larger context of what this access looks like, what does it mean, and how can it be achieved?
Thank you very much, Nidhi. And it's a pleasure to be back in India. I haven't been back for a while, unfortunately, this time only virtually. So I hope my slides will be shared. I have some slides to try and make this a little bit more also visually tangible. Thank you very much. So I want to continue from the introduction that Nidhi just gave, and to really underline that we focus a lot on technical aspects of accessibility. W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, is a technical organization that develops technical standards, but accessibility must be really seen in the broader context of a societal aspect and a cultural aspect. It's also attitudinal very much. So in addition to the ramps and the handrails and the elevators and all these technical solutions, it's really what value does it have and what priority does it have in the society. So to step back really and introduce and to disambiguate, because in the physical world, many people can imagine what accessibility is. They see the ramp, they see the handrails, and they can understand. But when it comes to digital accessibility, it becomes a little bit more ubiquitous and a little bit more difficult to say, okay, what does it really mean? So on the first slide, if we move on, I have just an example of somebody with a hearing disability who is using captions to watch videos. And that's really essential. And I think when we're talking about the post-COVID world, I think we have to think about two things. One is the immense digitization jump that this is causing and how much more content. We've already been in a highly accelerating world with more and more content, also media content, being put online. But it's also, it's going to be even more in a post-COVID world. We're already seeing how universities, schools, healthcare, government, all sorts of industries are now have a digitization jump because they have to provide online. We are doing our meetings right now online, and how are accessible are the platforms that we're using. Thankfully, we have sign language interpreters here to help us for people with auditory disabilities. Next slide is another group of people that is really important, which is a very broad group of people with cognitive and learning disabilities. I think we've all encountered websites that were difficult to use and confusing, and maybe it was a bit of a setback or it took us a bit more time, but for many people, this is really an exclusion criteria. Moving on to the next slide, people with physical disabilities, for example, somebody who cannot use the keyboard and needs to use speech input. How well does the website work using different kinds of input modalities? Does it have to use, does it only rely on the mouse? Can I use it with a keyboard only, or with speech input, or with other kinds of gestures, eye tracking, for example? Moving on, a large group is as well people with visual disabilities, and this ranges from low vision and different types of sight impairments, all the way to people with blindness. And here there are again many technologies available, text-to-speech output, but the website or the digital content has to be prepared accordingly. And this cuts through all generation. On the next slide, we have an example of an older person who's using computers. We're all aging. There is a bit of this myth that old people don't use technology. They do, and increasingly so because we're all aging as well. And as we age, we all develop different types of limitations, sometimes multiple of these limitations at the same time.
I'm so sorry for interrupting, but I have this message from a deaf person that the interpreter's screen is very small and he's not able to view the interpreter. It needs to be made big if anybody can do that.
Are they able to pin your screen?
Even after pinning the screen, the size remains the same. The size of the window remains the same.
Okay, I would just request Chandan or someone from the technical team to come in. We're really sorry, Shadi, if you can just give us 1 minute here.
Yeah, because the presentation is going on, video size will become like smaller. So this is the way.
After the presentation, it will be fine. Yeah. And for sort of after this, I'll take over.
Happy to continue without slides, maybe?
Yeah, that might work better for the deaf
Shadi,
community.
if that helps, then if
But
that's okay.
But the attendee can at their end they can enlarge the size of the video. So they can go.
Enlarge the size of the
They
video.
can,
How
yeah,
can
they
we
can
do
stretch
that?
it. They can go to the video and they can stretch it. Like they can.
Please sign that so that we have deaf friends can enlarge the video and then we could
Or
just
Bhavleen, you
proceed.
can type in the chat box. Like they can take their cursor to the video and they can stretch the video. So the size will become, yeah.
Yes, there is
Stretch the video.
that.
Thank you. Shadi, can we please start? We're really sorry for the interruption.
I think that's a very important point. We are talking about accessibility and inclusion, so that's very relevant.
Absolutely.
Moving on, I was talking about disability and different types of limitations that may occur throughout life. But also moving on to the next slide, young people, and particularly in countries where we have a high population of young people. This is an example, actually from India, from a previous trip where in a lab where young people are taught technology who are actually blind in this case. So disability really cuts through many aspects, and these are some of the examples. And just to get back again and remind the idea that we are talking about the big digitization jump. That's something like the COVID is happening and more content being online and all these people being impacted. But I think also very important is to remember is also in emergency situations. And this is not only for the COVID, but we also have it for the current cyclone situation in India, or many sources of disaster, or where critical information is important. Now imagine any of these people not getting the information they need. We can move on to the next slide, and you can just show all the bullet points here. What I wanted to highlight is the direct relevance. People with disabilities make up 15 to 20% of a population, over 1.2 billion people around the world. This is considered to be one of the world's largest minorities. You can go ahead and show all the bullets by pressing space. Yeah, often people with disabilities belong to the most vulnerable and marginalized groups of the society, and this is often compounded with other intersectionality aspects, as Nidhi was pointing out. people are not only people with disabilities, they belong to other groups. They are women, they are migrants, they are whatever as well in addition. And then last bullet here, I wanted to also highlight the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which sets access to information, including online information, as a human right. And I think this is really important to understand. This is not a nice to have. This is a human right to be able to access information. Again, I want to point out how access to information can be a matter of life and death when we have critical circumstances, such as COVID, where people need to have clear information understandable to them about what they can and cannot do. Moving on to the next slide, and you can show all the bullets here again. There are also business benefits in addition. So if you're not, so not as to just show the direct relevance to people with disabilities, which in itself is an argument, but additional benefits. And I don't have much time, but I just want to highlight a few things. Microsoft did a study many, many years ago to look at accessibility as a business. They wanted to see what is the value, what is the return on that, which is very sensible as a business to understand what their gain is. And they found that about 15 to 20% of the population needs the accessibility features built onto their software platform, which matches about the population of people with disabilities. But they found that nearly 2/3 of the population generally benefits from accessibility. And this is the aspect that is sometimes referred to as the electronic curb cut. So as Nidhi mentioned, the ramp that is not only used by wheelchair users, but by many, many more. So it's essential for some people, but beneficial for all. Everybody benefits from accessible design. This is further shown when we talk about mobile design. Mobile design and accessibility have a very high overlap. For example, it's nearly the same use case, whether you cannot see the screen well enough because it's so small or because you have low vision. Essentially, both design aspects are very similar here. We also need to consider many people have lower language skills and digital proficiency. And again, here accessibility contributes to more usability, more intuitive design, and supports many people to be able to use the software. And finally, aging people in general, employees, but also customers. And here again, there are studies from companies who have been looking at the benefits of that. Let's move on to two more slides. One here is on the existing standards to provide a solution. So we've hopefully established the need, what is accessibility and why is it needed? Now, okay, how can we actually implement it? And there is an existing standard from W3C, from the World Wide Web Consortium, called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. So we have lots of acronyms at W3C. I realize that. Now, this is an internationally recognized standard. It's adopted in many countries around the world. I believe also in the Indian government, I believe, I'm not sure if it's fully WCAG or partially derived from WCAG with some changes. I don't remember the latest on this, but I believe it's also relevant in India, but in many countries around the world, in the US, in the European Union, Australia, Canada, etc. It's also available as an ISO standard for those countries who cannot directly refer to a W3C standard. If they consider W3C not a formal standards body, they can go through and have an ISO number for that standard. This standard is developed by in a consensus process by international experts from all around the world, and it's continually evolving. We're right now working on the third generation of those guidelines to address the latest technologies. So there are standards, there are solutions that exist, and they need to be implemented. Moving on, the last thing that I want to say is standards alone are not the issue. I very much share the thoughts with Nidhi. Even though we're in 2020, we still need to work on awareness raising, education, and training. Unfortunately, many developers and designers learn web design and web development, but do not learn sufficiently about accessibility. So we need to provide more training. We have such training materials from our website freely available, including a full course that is running right now until the end of September, fully free course available by international trainers again. The website I will read out, it's w3.org/WAI. That's a website. In addition to the technical standards, you'll find a lot of awareness raising, educational materials, promotional materials to help you and your organization, but also that you can share to help others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shadi. And thank you for sharing your website and about the course as well. There's a lot that you packed in the couple of minutes. I won't repeat all of them, and it's difficult to sort of summarize everything, but I would say thank you for bringing the numbers, the research. Thank you for sharing really about WCAG, and we'll hear more about what's being done in India with regards to that from our department and the ministry when they'll join in. So we'll circle back for Q&A, but I would like to quickly move to our next speaker. I'd also like to sort of request our sign language interpreters if there's any other issue around speed or clarity or anything else to please flag it to us. We'll quickly move to our next speaker, Apurv Kulkarni. As Nipun said, he's Associate Director of Ola Mobility Institute, a Stanford alumni, and our esteemed member from the D&I task force of FICCI. Apurv, coming to you, Apurv, just thinking about how really, we've been talking about sorry. Am I audible? Yeah, okay. So I was saying that there's this whole connection between online and offline when we talk about urban mobility. And so what could inclusive platforms bring? What could technologies do to sort of bridge this, connect within the physical and digital world to make sort of urban mobility for people with disabilities easier and smoother and more accessible? Over to you, Apurv. Hello? Can you unmute yourself? We're not able to hear you.
I am.
Yes. 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 Yeah, you're audible now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Nidhi, and I'd like to thank FICCI for organizing this webinar on the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. As Nidhi mentioned, I'm a part of the Ola Mobility Institute. We are a policy research and social innovation think tank. We recently completed a study on urban travel experiences of persons with disability. I'll share more about the study, but essentially, kind of what us to do this, understand what the travel experiences look like, how they could be improved, and where are the connects to use technology to make the travel experience more accessible. So, and offline are not necessarily two silos; they influence each other. And here's an opportunity to identify that and talk about that. As a part of our study, we collaborated with 6 non-for-profit organizations working in the disability space with a collective experience of more than 165 years. We interviewed more than 20 frequent travelers living with a disability. These include men and women, persons with visual disability, locomotor disability, deaf and hard of hearing community members. And this is really a multi covering the entire trip chain. What I'd like to do is touch upon 3 examples, highlight the importance of digital accessibility even in an online experience. I'd like to begin with number 1 is trip planning. Today we have information around bus numbers, bus routes, train station, origin, destination, duration of the journey, etc., available online via websites, apps, etc. The unfortunate part is that many of these apps and websites are difficult to use or inaccessible for persons with disability. In addition to this, these apps and websites rarely give information that persons with disability particularly need. As an example, imagine that I am a wheelchair user and I know from website that bus number 23 will take me from stop A to stop B. Does not tell me is if the bus is or will it be accessible so that I'm able to make that bus journey. Here's an opportunity for the digital systems, the digital platforms which provide information to make it more accessible so that persons with disabilities are able to plan their travel independently. The second example that I'd like to give about is the actual physical journey. It's been a while since most of us have taken a metro or a local train ride, but I'd like you to jog back your memory. Recall navigating through a busy station, be it a Delhi metro or a Bombay local, is incredibly difficult. All the more difficult for someone who lives with a disability. Delhi Metro, for example, has introduced a system of Sahayaks or escorts who are trained assistants to support persons with disability throughout the journey from one ticket counter to other. Right? It's a very appreciable move. However, in the post-COVID world, when social distancing probably will be practiced for a long time, these capacities might be unavailable. And in such environments, we will have to think about solutions which could help persons with disability, be it someone who lives with visual disability or locomotor or speech and hearing, or for that matter, to navigate the stations and the ride per se seamlessly. What that could look like is a matter of exploration. It perhaps could look like on indoor maps, the way you have Google Maps for external world, or it could look like anything else. But the point is that we need technological solutions for this, and those solutions need to be accessible. The third example that I'd like to give about is digital payments. Cashless is really becoming the norm now. You have digital platforms, everything from mobile wallets to UPI and everything else used to facilitate digital transactions. I'm sorry to say, personal as a person who lives with visual disability, many of them are not accessible, and that really breaks my heart because what it means is it restricts my ability to complete a financial transaction safely. And so there's need to double down on accessibility to make it more seamless for everyone. Talking about mobility, and one might think that with reduced mobility requirement, kind of uptake, why is this important? This is important because right now is an opportunity to take a look at these systems and put in capacities in place so that technology is able to make the journey more accessible. Also, at this point, take a step back from mobility in particular and broaden this discussion to platforms and technologies in general. As we are all living in lockdown, online transactions, online platforms are becoming all the more important. Again, over here, customers are changing behavior, products, services, and processes that were purely offline are brought back to the drawing board by organizations, rethinking how they could be digitally rendered. Here's really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to think about accessibility as a KPI, as a key performance indicator, right from the get. As we create systems, new infrastructures, we should make universal accessibility one of the key requirements. And what would that look like? Maybe I could give you some examples. Shopping chain, for example, is developing an online platform to sell groceries as a business continuity plan. That platform is accessible for persons with disabilities. Say someone who's living with blindness and use screen reader. When OE, be it a laptop seller, laptop company or a mobile phone company or probably a company of consumer durables selling fridge and washing machines, when they design a platform for rendering after-sales service, take into account the needs of diverse groups. For example, persons with locomotor disability. When schools and colleges take it should take into account how you can make the experience inclusive to people of diverse abilities, from diverse disability and other experiences equal. I'd like to close by reference to the speech that Prime Minister Modi had made last week. Painted a vision for an Atmanirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant India. He had identified technology, demographic dividend, and demand as three of the 5 pillars which will be helpful, which will move the country forward towards this vision. We cannot achieve this vision unless we use all. Persons with disability are an important part of the human capital of the country. By investing in universal accessibility, we are investing in to economically add value, socially add value, culturally add value. When done from the start, as per world, accessibility are a mere 1% of the project. If not, retrospective improvements are factored in, the could be much higher. We need to become Atmanirbhar. We need this to come out of this crisis and to thrive in this crisis. Not investing in universal accessibility would cost us in terms of economic opportunity. And I hope that 2020 is the year when universal accessibility is performance indicator and Global Accessibility Awareness Day, is the day when it starts from.
Right. Thank you so much, Apur, for your presentation. I think very important points in any kind of accessing any kind of services, to think about the entire trip when it comes to mobility, when it comes to shopping, when it comes to e-commerce, any of the pieces, to think about the entire trip and to think about how lack of digital accessibility impacts independence, but also impacts privacy, maybe security, if you talk about payment gateways being inaccessible, and other pieces. So in mobility, it should be right from booking the ride to the payment, and then linking it to facilitating. But I'd like to drop in something that Nipun had really done, worked with Zomato to get them to identify and get a sort of category where restaurants had to mention whether they were wheelchair accessible or not. So really, to identify even physical accessibility, digital platforms can be a great way. And of course, cost of exclusion, as we know, is way higher than cost of inclusion. Like you said, retrospective fitting is always more expensive and more cumbersome. So we need to be forward looking. And with that, I'd like to come to our next panelist, who really has has products and services and the products really to bring to us, which have worked very wonderfully with people across disabilities and non-disabled folks. So really exhibiting kind of access for all. Can I please invite Parag Gupta, Head of Amazon Devices India, to now share with us some of the work that Amazon has done, including, one of the examples that Nipun gave was around the Echo Dot and Alexa. And I'd like to give one example which made reading a pleasure as a blind person was Kindle. So I'd like to invite Parag to share some of Amazon's work and products with us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. First of all, thanks to Nipun and thanks to you for being our customers. And truly, it's very humbling to hear experiences like this. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I head the devices business in India, and we have a cross-section of devices, including Echo, which is a series of smart speakers and smart displays. We have Kindle, which is an ebook reader, and we have Fire TV, which customers use to stream various digital content, news, information, movies, TV shows, etc. I want to thank you again for inviting me on this panel. I expect to learn a lot. I have already learned from the first two speakers, and maybe contribute a little bit to how we look at um, uh, accessibility, how we look at inclusivity in our products. I have been in mobile and tech industry for over 20 years, and at Amazon, I have been there in India for almost 7, 8 years now. So um, the amount of innovation that Amazon does is truly humbling in the accessibility space. Even earlier this year, we were awarded the American Foundation of the Blind's Helen Keller Achievement Award. So it really is very central in our product thinking. And we go one step beyond, which is what all the speakers have alluded to, that um, for us, the inclusivity is as important, right? I mean, because we have customers across the whole segment, from kids to elderly. And I'll cite some examples as I go along of how our products are used and are helping whatever the situation the customer might be in. Um, so at Amazon, we really think about ourselves as our mission as being the most customer-centric company, which we believe is very important and important to invent on behalf of the customers, right? And we almost always think of it um, in our design sessions, etc., as leaving a chair uh, for the customer. And what that does is it always allows us to look, or enables, I think is the right word, to look at uh, our products, our work with a straight line of sight to a customer benefit. In that, if everybody is familiar with Alexa, Alexa is the voice computing technology from Amazon, and we have several products that are built on it, including Echo and Fire TV and others. But really, what Alexa and what voice does, it democratizes technology for a lot of people. Um, and the people can be with different accessibility needs. We have talked about, I think Shari mentioned about different accessibility kind of cohorts, blind, limited mobility, even the people with memory loss have benefited from voice technology. Um, we always hear from our customers. We hear how Alexa has made life easier for them and given them more independence. I think Nipun mentioned that about independence, and I will cite an example of a customer anecdote that really we were really glad to hear the experience of that customer. And for some, it has even become a part of the family for some. And I thank you, Nipun, for alluding to that uh, that Alexa and Echo have changed your, or at least has touched your experience with technology. We also hear from elderly customers or those who have bought Alexa devices for their parents. It helps them stay closer. We have several voice activated features. I think a panelist mentioned not having to like get up or not having to um, make any effort other than asking Alexa to switch off your lights or turn on your lights. Um, as well as voice activated features like timers, alarms, and all of the Alexa computing. Customers have also reached out to tell us like how they were able to call their loved ones to get help. So we have features like drop in, and we have features like broadcast, where uh, just with your voice you can say, Alexa, call my mom, Alexa, call my son, Alexa, call the doctor, etc., right? And so that we have live customer anecdotes of how that has helped the customers, and we are equally satisfied by we have equally satisfied customers in this, especially in these last 4 to 6 weeks, that have bought Echo devices, Echo Show devices to stay in touch with their parents in India. So I think accessibility and inclusivity is a critical aspect, and we work hard towards it. And I'll speak about some specific examples also. For example, I mean, coming to that, I was talking just so that I finish my thought on that. We have recently built a capability where you can actually hold a product in front of a Echo Show and ask Alexa, what am I holding? Alexa will identify the product for you and will speak it out. By the way, to Rai's earlier point, we have closed captioning on our Echo devices, so that whatever Alexa is saying is also being captioned and shown on the screen. So that I think is another feature that helps people with different abilities. This earned, like, we have a customer anecdote on this feature that after calling the feature revolutionary, the customer said that the less stress I have to put on somebody else is less stress on me. That makes me feel good. And I think that that sort of feedback and that sort of outreach that the customers do, first of all, is utterly humbling, but it is also incredibly energizing for us. Coming to how we organize, we have a specific team called Alexa for Everyone that is focused on universal design. That means that building features and services that are able to be used and accessed by the widest range of people with different varying abilities, right? We want Alexa to be available and to be delightful for every customer who connects with it and who interacts with it. We are also focused on building new features to make Alexa even more inclusive. Like, for all of the things that we have done and we have spoken about, we also realize that we have literally scratched the surface, and there's a lot more that can be done, which kind of was also introduced by Umaji in her opening remarks. We have built something what we call the tap to Alexa, which means that it allows customers to interact with Alexa without even using the voice. They can simply tap on the screen and convert it into Alexa commands and then have Echo respond to it. And by the way, it's not just Echo. Most of our features talking about inclusivity, we try to make it available on our applications and our companion apps. Like, this feature is also available on the Alexa companion app on your iOS and Android smartphones. We offer Alexa captioning. I just touched upon it. So this is really helpful for customers who are deaf or have hearing impairments. And by the way, it is also helpful for customers who are trying to learn another language. I mean, talking about inclusivity, kids and elderly and different abilities in language learning is also helped by features like these. We also launched the ability for Alexa to speak faster or slower because we had heard both the feedback from our customers. So, for example, some older customers wanted Alexa to speak slower because they couldn't catch up with what Alexa was saying. And there are some customers, we heard from a customer who was blind, for Alexa to speak faster, since they are used to consuming audio much more quickly, given they are differently abled, right? And so it is really fascinating when you sit and hear these customer anecdotes, and then you say that, okay, it's not just you make it go in one direction, but really have to think for all customers and their different varying needs. And we are not only building experience that will be helpful for disabled customers. I keep coming back to this point along with the other panelists, because what we do believe in, and this holds for diversity in the workforce, this holds for accessibility in the technology, that once you build for diversity, you build for accessibility, you're ultimately providing better products for everyone. The ramp was an awesome example that everybody has talked about. When you build a ramp, it not only helps that person who may have initiated it for their own need, but it helps, it just makes it has unintended beneficial consequences for other users as well. So I think that's why building accessibility in technology, that's why building diversity into your workforce and everywhere, it is really, really helpful. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we support accessible feature across all of our devices and services. I have touched a lot on Echo and Alexa. Let me just give you a couple of examples of Kindle, and maybe Nehaji, you can give examples given you are a customer who is using Kindle, but in terms of like building the ability to customize the font type, size, and weight, and screen brightness, converting the brightness, the positive and the negative light, meaning the background can be black or white, really helps in different conditions that our users face every day during reading. Um, and just as I said, this is available on our application as well. So it's not just that Kindle device has this. We build these for inclusivity and accessibility for all. A couple of other examples I would give is on Echo Show, we have screen magnifier, which means that the parts of the screen can be magnified for better readability. We also have something called voice reader, which means that you can set it up to read what's on the screen. So while the captioning and slow moving or fast moving may help one cohort of customers, tap to Alexa can help another cohort of customers. Similarly, the voice reader can help the customers with um, uh, disabilities, blind or visual disabilities. And I'm just going to end my brief introduction with just repeating the fact that just we're humbled and really inspired when so many of our customers, including disabled, elderly, kids, have found such value in our products, in Alexa, the voice interactions with Echo. Sorry, one more last point I'll make is I think you talked about shopping and you talked about payments. So we are, when we invent things like, for example, now you can pay for your DTH recharges or your utility recharges on Alexa. It's as simple as saying, Alexa, pay my Airtel bill or pay my electricity bill. When this was designed and built, it wasn't designed and built for accessibility. But like I said, the voice control and building these capabilities with voice has really good benefits across um, the customers. They may have different abilities, they may be of different ages, etc. So it is truly central for us, and we really think about it, but we we try to make it so that it is it is available to all, and it can be used by many different sets of people. And then we include some specialized features like the ones, couple of things that I've talked about, to make it truly available for a specific cohort. So with that, I'll end here, and then if anybody has any questions, I can help answer during the Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Parag. That was really interesting and really lovely to know. I must sort of pause here to say that Shadi mentioned live captioning. You've been mentioning live captioning. I do want to acknowledge that we're sort of guilty and we do want to apologize. Our live captioners both are based in Calcutta, and because of the current sort of storm and everything that's hitting the weather conditions, their internet has been totally shaky and had to withdraw very last minute. So the communication that went out yesterday only mentioned sign language interpreters, but we're very aware that live captioning is important. And when this sort of webinar will be shared, we'll ensure that there's a transcription of the entire webinar. But coming back to you, Parag, thank you for sharing that. And just I can't even recall how many long work flights after reading all my work material. Kindle has sort of kept me company. And so really enjoy the experience. And it's like you said, it's not just for me. My sister, who's sighted as well, enjoys because it has the background light dimming features, and so people who are also photosensitive and many other. So this is just one product and sharing some experience since you invited me to share a little bit there. But again, I think all the panelists have been talking about universal access, and if we remember the Sustainable Development Goals tell us about leaving no one behind. And with that, I come to our next panelist, who will talk about a group of disability who are often left behind in discussions and disability rights and sort of thinking about access. And so talking to Krishnakumar, and I invite her here as a special educator, as a rehabilitation professional, as someone working on Tara, which is around access with Vidyasagar, the nonprofit based in the southern part of the country in India. And really to think about, we've touched based on education a little bit, but what does it mean with children living with developmental disabilities? Often in conversations, intellectual and developmental disabilities are left out. People find the groups and categories too complicated to include, but really technology has brought us in a space and would want us, has brought us to a position where inclusion and thinking through across disabilities, because disability is not really a homogeneous group, becomes very important. So Krishna, inviting you here, and if you could share with us, just briefly how children with developmental or intellectual disabilities just learn and how technology really helps them in this learning. And if you could follow that up with some apps that you as a special educator are using, and we can ask the IT team to have your presentation up for the second segment. Over to you, Krishna.
Thanks for the introduction, Nidhi. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be a part of this webinar and share space with such great change makers. Being a part of TARA, which stands for Team for Accessibility and Reasonable Accommodation, our motto is to work for accessibility, in a person's workspace and work home environment. So it's wonderful to listen to our fellow contestants who are highlighting about the accessibility importance and so much of learning takeaway today. So to kind of start with, before going into the apps, I would like to touch upon why it is important. Technology is important for a child with disability. So basically, learning is a process, right? Where you acquire new information, understanding, and skill. But people do not acquire these skills, they're not born with these skills intact. Our development is open to change, growth, and intervention over time. Children begin developing at birth and continue to adulthood. A child develops holistically in all domains of development. When I say domain, it could be physical, your cognitive, area, your communication, social, emotional, play, your activity of daily life, all areas. So the successful completion of these developmental domains help a child to reach his or her full potential. When there is a delay in the developmental milestone or an impairment in the domain, the organic learning process is affected. So basically, the milestones for a child with disabilities are uneven. The area is always ups and downs. So that's why there's always this huge gap in learning. And as Mr. Shadi Abu, we're mentioning about the different types of disability, I'm not going to touch upon that, but I want to highlight the factor that disabilities are not one-dimensional, and one-size-fits-all approach to learning does not work for children with disabilities. Differentiation is the key to learning. We need to consider a child's individual difference, address to the child's specific need, and to build on the strength of the child, we need to provide appropriate accommodation and support to ensure inclusion and equal participation. This is not only from a perspective of disability. All of us have different learning style. Learning style is basically a preferential way in which we observe, process, comprehend, and store information. So all of us, we have a combination of learning style profile. Like, I could be a visual learner, an auditory learner, a kinesthetic or tactile learner, or, a person could have a combination of these profiles. So a simple accommodation like a speed recorder to a person who's having difficulty hearing an auditory lecture would be such a great reasonable accommodation. Technology enhances multisensory learning. When I say multisensory, it's using all the senses simultaneously, like making use of sight, sound, touch, and kinesthetic at the same time. This will enable learner to transfer information from short-term memory to the long-term memory. So it is important for educators and parents to provide different ways of acquiring information and knowledge for the children, not just restricting to the chalk and talk method. And technology also paves way, for different digital differentiation. It helps us to reach, children with diversified background, not only with disability, but children with different learning style, interest, reading levels, and ability. So definitely technology is a key to inclusive learning. I would like you to, share with you apps that I've been using. The first thing is AAC, which is Augmentative and Alternative Communication, which is a good example. Technological tools can give voice to children, with autism spectrum disorder. When any individuals have severe speech and language disabilities, AAC provides them with an opportunity to express their thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas. So the versatility aspect of these applications make technology easy for any person with non-verbal challenges, be it a person with autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, or a range of other conditions. So through this AAC, we can make communication chart, educational aids that can promote learning in a very multisensory modality. The next one is social stories and visual schedule. Can I have the next slide, please? So basically, social stories are tools that teaches parents and teachers, which they use to teach children with autism the appropriate way to act in a social situation. Because social skills are sometimes very hard for a child on the spectrum to master. So the apps listed here cover a variety of situation and interaction a child may have and offer solution that children can practice through games. Visual schedule basically helps children with autism to have a daily routine and schedule for different tasks. They also like to know what to expect during the day. So this kind of avoids the unnecessary meltdowns due to a sudden change in their routine. The next one is digital storytelling, which allows users. Okay, we have the TTS app, which is text to speech application, which allows users to see text and hear it aloud simultaneously. So there are many apps available. Balabolka and is a free thing that can be downloaded from internet, and any file in a Word or PDF or any version can be uploaded into it, and it kind of converts into audio output. You can also save the file as an audio file, and you have various options of exploring different voices, changing the frequency, pitch, etc. The next app that I like to share is okay. One thing similar to the TTS, that is the text to speech. One option that is in all a PDF reader, which sometimes we may have not got noticed. That is, read out loud option in a PDF reader. You just have to go to the view, open the file, go to the view, and activate the read out loud option, and it kind of reads out in a word or phrases level, and you can even increase and change the different voice modality. The next one. Another option that works great is the Microsoft Office program. It has many accessibility features. Like, most of us are well aware of the spell check and the grammar check that we, use in our, office documents. But there's something called the check accessibility feature that can be opened, from the menu bar above the file icon, where it kind of rectifies a lot of errors, the space, and it also check the accessibility features and say whether the content might be, helpful for a person with disability. So it kind of gives you cues so that we'll be able to, work on the error and, correct it. The next one. Next one is a digital storytelling, which allows users to create engaging and creative storyboards. This can be used for both educational and entertainment purpose. The next one is the reading tools. Many students with dyslexia may struggle with reading, and they experience problem with spelling and comprehension. So I just, captured a couple of applications that, works amazing for students who have reading challenge. The first one is the MBA Awaz Reader, picture-based hints to encourage reading, and it also provides syllables and, word ends, like, the parts of the speech. It highlights the different parts of the speeches, and you can also create your own storybook. The Learning Ally solution helps struggling readers through a storybook. The M-W, which is a Merriam-Webster dictionary, you can just key in a word and, it tells you the meaning of the word. It tells you the thesaurus of the word, and it also gives you the pronunciation. There's a small speaker icon when you click on it. It actually helps you to learn how to pronounce the word. The rewordify.com basically helps one to understand the technical aspect of the writing better. You can also learn new word and, teach more effectively. The next one is for dysgraphia or writing disability. The next slide, where, basically writing disability is caused by motor issues, vision issues, or a variety of processing issues. So writing apps can, basically utilize word prediction, dictation, contextual spelling, and grammar checking. And, word retrieval tools also makes the writing process easier. This is not only for people who have difficulty with writing. In general, when we do a thesis, or you want to, check on your writing the mail, this is a great tool. Ginger Page, it ensures whether your sentence structure, grammar, spelling, and punctuations are intact. A Grammarly app, it's like a proofreading tool, like your online writing assistant. Quillbot is like a paraphrasing tool. You can just type, whatever you want to write in that small box given there. And then once you give, hit on the button, it gives you reword or restructure selected text. It either rewrite the content, gives you an alternative word format, and it also gives you a lot of creative, suggestions. Next one. Next slide. Take consideration, the current scenario with post-COVID. It would be ideal, for all of us to bring in technology into our home and classroom. And one thing I want to, highlight is that whatever I shared so far, and also the previous speakers, they've been highlighting that these are not only for people with disability, it's for, for a diversified users. So we call it the universal design and assistive technologies, which can form a part of your formal accommodation for persons with disabilities to increase the accessibility, to ensure equal access to educational opportunities, and, to support their inclusive education. So universal design is basically a process for designing products or structures in a way it reduces barriers for any individual, either with or without disability, regardless of the age, size, ability, or disability. and to increase opportunity for the widest possible range of users. Mr. Shadi was giving an example, about the
Really
mobile.
sorry, Sir Vikash Prasadji from the ministry is waiting for us to begin his session. So just if you could wrap up in the next minute or so, it'll be really helpful.
Sure.
I'm really sorry to pause you here, but I figured you'd finish most of your content. So really sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So one thing I highlight is, going forward, we know that the traditional classroom approach is going to be very, limited because of the student population, social distancing, and limited school hours. So we need to compensate the lesser school hours. So technology is the best way to kind of feel the same level of learning. Integrating technology will become more sustainable solution if technology reaches to every child. So because the government body and corporate sectors are also part of this forum, I would like to, take a moment to request that the government and corporate sector should be providing or thinking about a way of providing some kind of accessibility format, like a tab or a mobile to every student, to bring technology into their home.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Krishna. I really think, learning about so many different apps and best practices, sometimes it also becomes very grim to think that we're talking about awareness right now, but I think there's so much done in technology. Of course, a long way to go in terms of awareness and developers and people and companies and businesses learning. But I think this is the right time for us to also uh, push harder and talk more and emphasize more on accessibility and universal access. With that, I'd like to actually invite Vikash Prasadji. Sir is from the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here today. We know that the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities started the whole sort of new understanding and conversation around access and inclusion for persons with disabilities globally, and India was amongst the first few signatories to this, to ratify the convention. And so the government has been very proactive in terms of sort of looking towards rights of persons with disabilities with the new Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act in 2016, with the Accessible India campaign. And so we'd really turn to you, sir, to take us through some of the policy measures and implementations under both the Act and the Accessible India campaign to think about digital inclusion and digital access for persons with disabilities. Over to you, sir. Vikash Prasadji, we're not able to hear you. If you could
Just
unmute yourself, sir. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
hello.
We can listen you. Yeah, we can
Anji,
hear.
sir, you're audible.
Yeah, I don't know why it is going mute all again.
Should be fine now, sir.
Sir, you are unmute. Yeah, please carry on.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Fiji for arranging this beautiful webinar, and it is very relevant at this point when the COVID is just gaining momentum, and I think it is going to be we have to live with COVID for quite a time. So we need to prepare ourselves for all the uh, eventualities, so that even in if it continues for longer period, we are able to handle the situation in a better manner. So starting right from the department views, first of all, I would like to give a bit of our department view that our department is taking all type of uh, empowerment of persons with disability, be it social empowerment, economic empowerment, physical empowerment, or educational empowerment. So we have all the schemes of all kinds. Just like for social empowerment, we are running Accessible India campaign, and then for economic empowerment, we are having a skill development program. Similarly, for physical empowerment, we are doing aids and assistive devices to the poor persons. And for educational empowerment, we are giving scholarships to the persons with disability. Right now, coming into the accessibility and Accessible India campaign, it all started with UNCRPD. UN Convention for Rights of Persons with Disability, when India was the founder member and it signed the agreement in 2007. And in Article 26, Chapter 9 of that UNCRPD, it was enumerated that ensuring rights on equal basis should be there for persons with disability, and accessibility should be included in IT and communication also, and in transport and built up environment. So it was full accessibility which was envisaged. Now, to implement this UNCRPD, we came up with Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016. So in this, the accessibility part contains from chapter section 40 to 46. Now, if you see that number of disability has also been increased from 7 to 21 in this act. So the challenges has grown many times, because earlier there were 7 type of disability. So all the equipments or all the accessibility features or whatever is to be provided for these 7 types of accessibility. But with the increase of 21 types, now you have to design the features for all these 21 types of accessibility. So obviously, in all the fields, be it in the built environment or transportation or IT and communication, everywhere the challenge has grown, and it is up to the industry and to the government to cope up with this, so that a true and inclusive atmosphere can be provided to the persons with disability. So now in the act, if you see that section 40 tells about that central government will notify the standards of accessibility. And in 41, it tells that all the transport sector infrastructure, be it bus stop or buses or the carriers or the services also, like ticket booking facility, everything should be accessible. Similarly, in section 42 of the act, it tells that all the print and electronic media and the electronic goods of daily use should be in the accessible format only. Similarly, for section 43, it tells about the consumer goods of the daily use, just like TV or fridge or your printer or computer, whatever is there, has to be in the accessible universal design so that every person can use it. Similarly, and there is a time limit also defined in the act. So section 46 tells about that all the services has to be made accessible within 2 years of notification of the rules. So we have notified the rules in June 2017 itself. So 2 years has already passed in June 2019. So now that act can now be enforced by any person. And regarding, if we come into the IT accessibility, we can see that for digital accessibility, we have already notified the rules in our act, in which for the Government of Indian websites, we have notified that guidelines of Government of Indian websites will be taken as a standard accessibility guideline. Similarly, for the private websites or private portals or whatever you call it, so for that, web content accessibility guideline of version 2 has been notified as a standard guidelines. So all has to adhere with that guidelines, and that has to be adhered within June 2019 only. So now the period is already over. Similarly, now this web content accessibility guidelines involves a wide range of accessibility services for visually challenged people, for auditory, speech, cognitive, language, learning, or neurological. Any type of disability, if you see, it has a coverage of all types of disability. So if any website or if any portal is accessible, then is complying to this audit guidelines, then it is accessible. So you need to get the certification for getting your website accessible. Now this can be done online. There is a online audit method through which you can get your website checked and get audited. Similarly, now it has all the more become important during this COVID period, because every private sector, corporate sector has a has a customer as well as employee. Both can be a person with disability. For a customer, you need to have your website accessible. All your apps which are designed needs to be accessible, and the documents which are there in your website should be in the accessible format. Many a times it has been seen that those documents are scanned and then those are uploaded in the website, so it becomes difficult for the persons with disability to access those documents. So these need to be checked in the website. And then your social media platforms should also be in the accessible format. If you are providing some images into it, then you need to explain about those images so that a visual impaired person can also know about the content. And it is all the more important because at this time of COVID, you know that the persons with disability has a very limited mobility, and the mobility has also reduced due to COVID because there are so many restrictions in the public transport system, and even it is difficult for them to go outside. So they need to avail all the services through the electronic mode only, either through your portal or your through app or website, whatever might be the so it is very important that you get your website audited with the standard and get it fully accessible so that the persons with disability can't be excluded from getting your services. That is more of a important. Nowadays we are getting so many complaints from all the quarters that many of the features in the apps are not in the accessible format, just like they are having some uh, uh, images in that, and then in the password they have to write something which they can't read, or that image form of data checking all so so those need to be rechecked, and it should be tested with person with disability using them, so that they can point out really what are the problems in the area. Similarly, all the electronic publications should be given in the website, and the publication should be there in the guidelines, and all special checks should be done. Special checks should be done in all your portals, so that you should ensure that the services are provided seamlessly to them. Now, regarding your employees, uh, so in employees, many a times it is seen that the companies are using ERP solutions, and every employee has to work from home and give his input into the system in that system only. So you need to see that the ERP system is fully end-to-end accessible, and all the processes and all the systems are made customized as per the needs of the persons with disability. And for that you need to change your applications or information systems and whatever, so you need to tinker in all those features. So you can start doing right now, because still uh, work from home uh, is there to remain for quite a long time. And then many a time the dissemination of information to the employees are not in the accessible format, so they can't know what the company are issuing the instruction to their employees. So those instructions are also to be made in the accessible format, because many a times they even if there is, they can't be read. So it has to be auditory form, or the image should be explained, or whatever should be there. Even the company social media should be inside the social media, or the WhatsApp group or whatever should be there, so those should also be made accessible, so that a complete information flow is there in the EA. Similarly, if you see the ministry has also taken out some guidelines during this COVID period, wherein they have made the state commissioners of persons with disability as a nodal officer for persons with disability in the state. So if any company or any corporate sector is facing any problem with persons with disability, or getting their approvals or they can approach directly to them. They are the nodal officer and they will help you out. And we have given the names and the contact, email ID, everything in our website. So you can go and check in there. Similarly, the district nodal officer has been, district welfare officer has been nominated as a district nodal officer for resolving all the issues at the local level, at the district level. So you can also approach them if they have a movement problem, or if they require to send users or a service provider to their home and they are not reaching them. So for that, district nodal officer is already nominated for each district. So these are the, apart from that, we have also issued advisory to the state governments and the central government departments regarding the COVID centers to be made accessible. All the COVID centers, all the COVID facilities, or the health department, wherever the persons are coming, and those has to be made accessible for the built-in environment, information system, even the services what they are providing. So that is very important. And we have also issued advisory to Ministry of Information and Broadcasting that all the TV news which are being broadcasted, at least 2 times there should be a broadcast in the sign language format, so that the persons with hearing impairment can listen to the news and can understand them. So these are the advisory we have already issued to the state governments, and then it is up to the corporate sector to now come and help lending a hand in this COVID period to the persons with disability by improving their IT infrastructure. Basically, now the IT infrastructure will be more used rather than the built-up environment and other infrastructure. So they need to review all their system, audit all their system, and then after getting the change, it should be checked by getting it confirmed from the person with disability and getting the feedback from them after using that what all difficulty they are facing, so that those can also be resolved. Many a times it is not only the IT system which is creating the problem. Many a times it so happens that accessing the IT system itself become a difficult part for them. So you need to design the IT system in such a way so that they can avail the facilities whatever is provided. So these are the basic inputs from the ministry side. If anybody has any question, they can ask now.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much. I think these are some excellent guidelines and really sort of directives, very well thought through, that the department has come up.
Thank you. Any other guidelines is required, you can suggest us. That even we have written to Mighty regarding the Arogya Setu app also, because we have got complaint that Arogya Setu app is not accessible for visually impaired. So they are working on it, and soon they will be releasing the version where Arogya Setu will be made accessible for them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir, for that very urgent response and fact that you're sharing. Just for the audience, we want to pause a second. There are some questions coming in. Thank you so much. As you know, we're 15 minutes behind time, but conversations have been so interesting and so much to learn and such best practices that we'll just request everyone to stay with us for another 15 minutes to take this Q&A session forward. And we'll start with Vikash Prasad ji, sir. Just a small question, sir. You mentioned about the Act and you said 2 years are up and you've started receiving sort of complaints or complaints can be taken to the Disability Commissioner, etc. If you can tell us a little more of the mechanism around, digital inaccessibility and where could the complaints be taken and how that can be ensured in terms of implementation. Just that was one question that was just as a moderator privilege that I'm just using.
So first of all, if any problem is faced by persons with disability, he can approach the organization first and point it out what are the problems they are facing. If the problem is not resolved to his satisfaction or not attended to, he can approach a state commissioner of persons with disability. He is the designated authority for Rights of Persons with Disability Act. So he can approach there. Even we have also a grievance redressal mechanism for the government of India, CP grants we call it. So there, if the complaint is registered, then we get the complaint in the department and then we forward it to the concerned authority for taking up the action. So these are the formal mechanism which we are using right now, and we are also in development of a crowdsourcing application which will be applicable for all the three types of three verticals: building infrastructure, even IT infrastructure, wherein the mobile app is being developed, where the person can directly complain in the mobile app itself, and it will reach to us, and our PMU team will go through that complaint, and then it will be forwarded to the concerned authorities, and we will be keeping track of it also, and we will be replying to the person who has made the complaint, but it will take maybe 2 or 3 months time to implement. That's all.
Right. Sir, there is, I will invite Nipun Malhotra, the chair of the subcommittee of EPWD with FICCI, D&I. Nipun, if you can ask a question to sir, and then we have one question from the audience directed towards Vikash Prasad sir, and then we could move to the panelists as well.
Right. Thanks so much, Nidhi, and thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you, Nipun.
So a lot of the education has now shifted. In fact, education has completely shifted online because of the lockdown, and there are loads of students who are facing challenges because of lack of accessibility in the software that are being used by schools, lack of special educators, interaction one-to-one with the students, etc. So, and in fact, even the finance minister in a stimulus mentioned that something will be done, especially for the deaf and the blind, in terms of education. So, what can we expect from the government in terms of making education more accessible to persons with disabilities in the immediate future?
No, this is the challenge we are also facing. It we have received many, but then the app which has been developed, just like many of the schools are using Zoom app or maybe the Microsoft PA. So if that is made accessible, or if some feature is included in that, then only it can be made accessible. I mean, we require suggestion from you also, or everybody, that how to go about it, because we also don't clearly know that how the distant education can be made truly accessible, because it is really technologically challenging.
Right. Thank you, sir. So this is an open invitation to civil society. So of civil society to give inputs by Vikash Prasad sir, and this is really a generous invitation to sort of put together our thoughts and what works for us, etc. And so we'll ensure that it reaches you. We'll also invite Apurv Kulkarni, who's another D&I, FICCI D&I task force member here, if he had any questions for Vikash Prasad ji, and we'll move to the panelists right after.
Thank you, Nidhi. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Vikash ji. I represent Ola Mobility Institute. We are a think tank which works at the intersection of policy research and social innovation. I had a couple of questions. One is, as transport opens up, for example, civil aviation is opening up from next Monday, buses are opening up, other public transport is also going to open up, and social distancing will still be important. Would you have any thoughts on how the government is thinking about providing access to public transport for persons with disabilities while ensuring that social distancing norms are adhered to?
Yeah, actually, we are issuing a letter to both all the three ministries, MORTH, Civil Aviation, and Railways, that already in their guidelines they have got a special assistance for the persons with disability. If you see in the buses, there is a reserved seat for persons with disability. So now we have written that even if those seats are vacant, so keep it vacant, and no other person should be allowed to sit in there. Only the persons with disability should be allowed to occupy those seats, because once it is occupied, it becomes very difficult for the persons with disability to come. And so that guideline we have already we are issuing advisory to MORTS, so that persons with disabilities should have some seat reserved for them. Even in the railways also, they have told that there are 4 berths are reserved for them, so that will continue to be there. However, in railways, we are telling that for the social distancing, you need to provide a person at the station, at the point of drop only, till that point of seat is there, so he needs to give full assistance to them, and they need to get seated at the seat, so that the person with disability doesn't has to experience all the problems of social distancing, or because at this time this is the only mechanism which we can think of having them avoid social distancing. So these are the and in the airports there is already a provision beforehand also, that there is a special counter where person with disability can go and get the assistance. So that is already present. Only in buses and railways we have taken up the issue at this time.
Thank you, sir. I may ask one question.
Can we, sorry, we're running out of time. We'll circle back, Sir Vikash Prasad, sir, if you could wait for a couple of minutes. We also have our panelists. We'd like to do a round of questions and then probably take more questions. If you would give us just a couple of minutes more, that we'll be really grateful. Thank you, Nipun and Apoor, for your questions. Could I please go to Parag? I know we've been holding up all the panelists and the participants here, but really thank you so much for these extra couple of minutes. I just wanted to come to you with one question around what advice would you give other businesses around access and inclusion, how to even start thinking for those businesses who've not started thinking. I'm just clubbing one or two questions here. Actually, somebody has asked, and I know you've partly answered this, around what are the captioning options, captioning support available for Amazon on the Amazon devices for hearing impaired individuals. How can Amazon help with Alexa and other services like Google, Facebook, Apple have been rolling out devices? So that's been given as an example. So I'll stop at two questions for you and hope if you could share some of your thoughts on those.
Sure, thank you. So let me start with the first question that you asked about how can folks or designers or product or devs could think about it. I think you just, like I said, you don't have to think separately about it, because we've talked about it in the first part of the conversation about many such examples from the physical world, about building a ramp, to your own example of something like bigger fonts or back being used in different ways. And so I also said in my previous comments that we truly believe in that if you design the products that are starting from a customer's need and what you're trying to solve, we call it the customer backwards approach. At Amazon, for example, we start every project or every new initiative by writing a PR. That's important because it forces us to think in a straight line of our work to a customer benefit. And when you start doing that, you have these intended or unintended benefits of making it better for everybody, right? And that's how we think. Like I said about diversity in an organization. There's a fair bit of literature and conversation on how to build diversity in an organization. Similarly, accessibility in the products, it makes it better for everyone. And if you start thinking like that, I believe that you will start on that journey. If you sat down with a pen and paper and said, oh, let me think about designing a product for X person with X disability, I think you will have a harder time doing it. And so, so other panelists have talked about, I think Apoor talked about a bunch of features that they are developing in their applications. There was conversation about payments and digital payments and how to make them simpler. So I would just advise that don't start with the intention of building a product for a disabled person. Just start with the intention of building a great product for a customer need, and along the way you will make it valuable for all customers. And that's how I would answer that question. The other questions, I think what we can do is if there is a way, we can send you more literature on versus going here into settings and kind of those level of details, but switching on captioning, switching on tap to text, switching on some of these accessibility features are available via device settings in our devices and products. And finally, you asked about other. I'm not familiar with everybody's roadmap and what they are defining and what they are designing, but I'm glad that if the industry leaders that you named are also designing for accessibility and are making their products inclusive and accessible. So I do know that some of the products, like for example, Facebook Portal, it comes with built-in Alexa. We have built-in Alexa now in smartphones and speakers and displays and even appliances, like for example, ACs and washing machines, etc. So we have a very large developer effort as well, because one thing that I and my team knows is that we cannot assume to know all the use cases, and through our developer outreach programs with Ask and with Skills and with AVS programs, and then we can give you more details on it. We kind of like empower the developer community, hardware, software, applications, to integrate Alexa into their solutions. So that's another way of integrating Alexa and bringing voice activation into your application for your customers. I hope that answers the questions that you were asking.
Yes, thank you so much, Parag, and thank you for staying with us. We know you had a prior engagement, and we've sort of extended your time. So once again, thank you so much. There's a question which I would open not just to Parag, but to all panelists if someone wanted to respond to that. If, what are the kinds of products that are available for non-speaking autistic persons and who basically also have a mobility impairment. So we're talking about persons living with multiple disabilities, but very specifically here they've asked about autistic persons who are nonverbal, living with locomotor disabilities, for them to access information or to use some of the other products if folks know of any products and would like to share. So this is a question that's open to all panelists, if at all there's information. Otherwise, this can come up as a suggestion for businesses and companies to think about in terms of cross-disability access or multiple disability access.
Didi, I would just like to kind of, add an input to that question. The first the AAC that we discussed, right? The Avas, Jello, or Japta, that is for, a person with non-verbal challenges, be it autistic or, cerebral palsy. So that provides a lot of, scope for communication aspects. But to answer to the, question where they also have a motor challenges, there is this product called Aditi, a non-contact switch that makes a computer accessible to individuals with motor impairment, and the switch gets activated in the proximity of any part of the human body, and works as a left click of the mouse. If that is something that they want to try immediately.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. There is also sort of, sorry, I'm just reading the question.
Nidhi, if I may add,
yes, please.
Regarding the question that was asked, specifically transportation persons on the spectrum have unique needs. I've written a blog about how travel journey can be navigated. It's on our Medium page, so you could search Ola Mobility Institute on Medium, and you'll find that blog. Within that, certain resources have been identified for businesses to make the travel journey accessible for persons living on the spectrum, as well as for the persons themselves, who could then use those tools and devices to make their own experience more pleasurable. So maybe whoever asked that question could look that up, or please do connect with me on Twitter as well at Apoorv Kulkarni. I'm happy to direct it to the blog.
Right. Thank you, Apoorv. I actually wanted to circle back to Shari. We just have two more questions for the panelists, but I had one question for Shari to even, just to coming from W3C, I don't know if you get this question asked very often, but as an activist, I am told this very often that thinking about accessibility becomes so overwhelming. If we think about one, then the other is a problem. If we think about other, then we have to think about multiple. How can people, and I'm not talking about just businesses, because really even civil society, even disability rights activists, many of them do not have a cross disability perspective or are working for one disability per se. And so just daily life through websites, through apps, through everything online, how do you even start thinking about, or not to ask you to repeat everything, but when this gets overwhelming in terms of, oh my God, we're frightened, we don't know where to start, what could be good ways for people to think about access and inclusion?
Very good question. Yes, we get asked that question all the time, and it is very understandable. So I think there have been two things have to be separated here. One is projects that are starting from new. For example, if you're redesigning a website and are the beginning of a project, or creating a new website or a product, that is one situation. And the other is if something already exists and needs to be retrofitted. Now, when something already exists and need to be retrofitted, usually the costs are much more higher. And the same with the redesign or creating a new product, the earlier it's considered, the better. In both cases, it's important to take manageable steps. I think one has to be pragmatic and one has to understand what levels. Sometimes things that seem complex are much easier. For example, they're very low-hanging fruit once one understands the requirements. For example, color contrast. This is something that blocks readability for millions of people, but is something that is fairly easy to do if it's considered during the design process. So that's one category of understanding the space of work and going about it smartly and understanding how to prioritize things in manageable ways and not to try to boil the ocean, as they say. But the other thing that I think is maybe even more important is the approach towards accessibility, and I think, or inclusion in general. I think what you were talking about is unfortunately a typical situation where people try to do pieces by pieces. So let's fix something for somebody who has a particular type of requirement, and going bit by bit. And that's not a holistic approach. What we really recommend is to step back and use a so-called user-centered design process. And I think a lot of the successful applications on the market demonstrate that when products are more intuitive, when you put the human in the center, and I'm specifically calling out human, so just people, think about your customers, your website visitors, who is going to be using it and how, and address the user first, then you find that accessibility fits in much more naturally, together with usability, together with many other considerations that you have to address. And you're addressing it in a natural way. You are distributing the responsibilities across your development team, and it becomes a cultural aspect of the design and development process. This is when we find accessibility implementation to be most effective.
Thank you so much, Shadi. My next question, really, Apoor, Nipun, or any of the panelists could choose to respond to. How one of the questions that the participants have asked is, how can accessibility be ensured for high touch surfaces, since the tactile medium may not be comfortable to use in the new normal scenario? So we're talking about really innovation in the COVID and post-COVID world, and how can we ensure, I wanted to say this is really ironical because sometimes the tactile surfaces as a blind individual are very important and useful for me, and sometimes they're really a pain, right? Like the in-flight services now, if you see airlines in the whole sort of space of innovating technologically and becoming smarter are now having, for example, even call buttons on their screens, which are tactile but have no audio output. So I think we're going into this complex space of innovating without accessibility or full access. And trust me, if you sit 8 hours through a flight without a call bell, that means you don't get water on time, you don't get other assistance, etc. But anyway, coming back to really tactile surfaces and what could be innovative solutions for this new normal, Apoorv, Nipun, Shadi, or anybody else really who wanted to respond to this.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we've seen. I think we have to separate mobile technologies here very often, or handheld devices have other mechanisms, including vibrate function to give certain types of feedback. But what's also very commonly used is simply a jack, an audio jack, so you can connect your audio device. Or a headset and get the necessary audio information. And you can make surfaces accessible in other modalities through that. So rather than having the several buttons across that one would touch and accidentally activate or not know what is happening, you would have some kind of a dialogue that explains things. So I think one of the generally, and this is looking a little bit in the future, I think one of the things we're going to see also due to digitization stuff with COVID is increased interconnectivity of devices and products, the so-called smart technologies or Internet of Things, also referred to, where devices can connect and where you may be able to connect with your own personal device that you're accustomed to, that has the right configuration, for example, through Bluetooth or something, and be able to actually explore digital technologies around you. Get the information that there is a button that you can press on your passenger seat and activate that through your own device. I know this sounds a little bit futuristic, but I think it's going to be sooner here than we think. And I think it's important that we already start considering these so-called emerging technologies because this is the reality of tomorrow.
Right. Thank you. We have a couple of questions more, but we only have a couple of minutes to go before 5 p.m. IST. So I'm going to circle back to the panelists who haven't spoken. Apoorv, I think you've been also somewhere mentioning in our discussions about procurement policies and sort of thinking through, because it's not just your native design, but also how procurement plays a great role. So if you wanted to add something around that for inclusive technologies and leave a last comment, I can then move to Nipun to take his comments as well.
Thanks, Nidhi. I think if I may take a moment to answer the first question. The use cases for touch have really changed because there's a new constraint of safety that has new come up now. And therefore, I don't think there's an easy answer in terms of what's possible. Like every product or service is undergoing a serious inspection, examination, and is being redesigned. The involvement of touch should also equally undergo kind of an examination. And yes, probably technologies like near field communication, that's NFC, or voice input, or any other, maybe a replacement, but those will have to, you can't go looking for a nail when you have a hammer in hand. You have to customize the tool based on the use case. I've called that out in a blog that's posted on FICCI website today. Again, happy to connect over that later with anyone who's interested. With respect to procurement, I think government is one of the largest buyers of any kind of in any country, and so is the case in India. I think as procurement and tender norms are being rethought, for example, global tender thresholds or eligibilities are being redefined. I think there's potential for including accessibility as one of the evaluation criteria for any product or service that could be procured by the government and perhaps some of the larger corporations in India and globally. I think that would uplift the importance of accessibility, make it relevant in short term, so that people who are living from quarter to quarter are understanding the importance. Perhaps, if Vikas ji is available, I'd like him to maybe come in and maybe share his views around how government is thinking about procurement, about maybe amending the general financial rules or otherwise. And I think it will be a great opportunity to give a boost to accessibility in all products and services.
Yeah, just I would like to answer this. Regarding the government project, there is a procedure of getting the project approvals. So in that project approval, through the Ministry of Finance and Expenditure, we have taken a detailed guidelines. So when there are many check parameters in this, so one of the parameter is also accessibility. So that if any project is approved, before that the accessibility provisions is checked in that project approval. So that is already there in the government. But for getting in the tenders and all those things, we have also thought about it, but there were quite a lot of complications in that. So we thought it is better that in the specification itself, whatever the IS specifications are there, so if we include in those specifications, it would be more helpful rather than going through the open tendering procedure, and then there are so many parameters in the tendering procedure, and then including, and then there is no standards also where to check from, how to check from. So that will become a very complicated case of deciding a tender itself. So that's why our approach is rather than to get it included in the IS standards only. I hope it must have clarified your point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nidhi, can I just comment for 30 seconds on this?
Yeah.
Yes, please, Nipun.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging to hear what Mr. Vikas Prasad of course said, and I think Apoorv is also completely right when he says that procurement policies are really a key. I think India has moved way forward compared to say 20 years back or even 10 years back when it comes to accessibility. But the accessibility debate in India is still very reactive in nature rather than proactive. For example, we are saying that it's been 2 years since the RQWD Act rules have been created. So now we should make sure that everything is accessible, or we should go to a chief commissioner, or etc. What I've noticed in countries like in the West, especially in countries like America, is that it's more proactive in nature, which I think saves a lot of time and encourages accessibility to a large extent. So I think in India also the debate needs to change. For example, when a building is made, one shouldn't really wait for the building to be made to file a PIL or to go to a commissioner to really ensure that it is made accessible. But instead, it's to get a completion certificate, one should really require an accessibility NOC, just like one gets a fire NOC. And that will only happen when building bylaws in each state are changed as per what the RPW Act says. Unfortunately, the RPW Act speaks of the harmonized guidelines, but no state has any changes building bylaws. Just like that, I think in technology too, I think in procurement policies, if accessibility is mandated, it will create a large impact. Like we spoke about schools and how schools are struggling to get educational softwares. Majority of schools are, of course, government schools. So if government schools start by choice start insisting only on accessible softwares, most platforms will start getting incentivized to be accessible. And thus, automatically, private schools will also start having accessibility in that sense. Arogya Setu, it's great that the ministry has now responded and has written to the concerned authorities to make the Arogya Setu app accessible. But why not have standards which ensure that whenever a government comes out with an app, it's accessible at that stage rather than reacting later? So this is just one point I wanted to comment on. Back to you, Nidhi.
Thanks so much, Nipun. I think that just makes a lot of sense because we've been talking about in physical spaces around the building codes, the same conversation around online, etc. There's a comment which is very interesting that there are procurement policies in US and Europe and other parts of the world, which Gunella has shared here. So thank you so much for sharing that. And these are formal guidelines, and I'm sure we can also move forward. Like you're saying, we have moved forward, but I think the pace demands a little more pace and proactivity is demanded. So there is one question from the audience which I know we don't have time, but this is the last one, and then we'll come to close with Krishna and Nipun. Vikash Prasad sir, there's a question around if the department has given any guidelines around online learning, because now that's in the whole COVID state, that's becoming the whole way of learning. And so for students with disabilities, and if you see there's parallelly yesterday, there was Delhi University conducted a webinar to understand the challenges, because they're talking about online exams and provisions for blind students, for example, in taking online exams are not really there, which are around scribe. So they're not really sorted around how would then students with disabilities give exams. So just the online learning and how it is in the COVID world, if the department has issued guidelines, and where could one circle back for more support on this? Thank you, sir.
Okay, so actually this does not lie basically in the preview of our department. Basically, it is MHRD who has to take out, because all the guidelines regarding inclusivity and accessibility is already there in there also. So, but if any problem comes or any complaint comes, we will refer it back to MHRD so that they look into it and provide a accessible solution to the students with disability also, so that they don't face any type of problem. So
thank you so much, sir, for this openness and willingness to support students with disabilities. Thank you, sir. And Krishna, can I come to you for any last comments?
Yeah, sure, Nidhi. So just taking into post-COVID, recommendation, we're all aware that we're going to have like a lesser, school hours. So we need to think about innovative approaches to make, classroom more effective, like, bringing in a lot of technologies, like a flipped classroom approach, which is an instructional strategies where, the students have, required reading and lecture before coming into classroom, and the actual classroom space is mostly used for discussions, problem solving, applied learning. So the initial learning part can be done at home through integration of technology, and the lesser school hours can be productively used for engaging application oriented learning. And I'm sure like a lot of schools are using technologies like Google Classroom, Edmodo, Verso, PBS, Kids, TED, Ed, which is a support, outstanding, providing outstanding short video or many concepts. So yeah, we need to think about innovative technologies.
Right. I'm just going to pause here before I go to Nipun, because there's someone very upset that we've not taken their question. I also want to tell the participants that we're dealing with multiple access needs here. Nipun is a wheelchair user. I'm completely, totally blind. Apurv is low vision. At least these are the disabilities that I know which are on the panel. And so, taking participants' questions has also been a whole process of sort of keeping voiceovers on and accessing emails and having 2 years plugged in with different things. So I do want to profusely apologize while requesting, and this is particularly because there are some civil society members who are really upset. So just wanted to flag that we're also dealing with multiple disabilities here and dealing with the back end management.
Nidhi,
so we will take the question. Yeah.
Nidhi, if I may just
take
come
a
in?
question, Satyakumar Singh ji?
Sure. No, what I'm saying is any questions that remain unanswered, please continue to write to us at FICCI, and we will take it up with the relevant panelists and get back to you, or even with the government.
Sure.
So
I think somebody has asked a
there might be
question
some.
first, and I haven't. Umaji, can you read Satyakumar Singh ji's question? Because I think they've asked for a very long time, and I've probably missed that question. So I do want to address, acknowledge, and give you just 10 seconds to ask that question, because I also want to be respectful of the chronology in which people have asked questions.
Yeah, just a minute. So his question is, Mrs. Satyakumar Singh's question is that he's the Honorary Secretary General of the National Association for the Blind, and his question is to Mr. Vikas Prasad. And he's saying that, is the Government of India providing any grants to NGOs for relief work and accessibility for persons with disability?
Yeah, actually, we already have a scheme of Deen Dayal Rehabilitation Scheme, where we are providing around 600 NGOs the yearly grant for running various type of projects. So for this year, we have expedited their grants, and already we have released their first installment. And even for this year, we are releasing in advance so that they don't face any cash flow problem for during this COVID period. So we are the NGOs who are registered with us, we are providing the grants and financial assistance to them regularly.
Thank you so much,
Thank
sir,
you.
for being
Thank you so much.
graceful and taking that question at the end, even after I promised that that was our last question. And thank you, everyone who's participated and for your patience. And as Omaji from FICCI has suggested, we will try to, there are a couple of more questions which are not answered, but we really run over time and over time. So I'd like to pause here by giving Nipun, inviting you to share any last thoughts, and then I can just come and close and invite Umaji for a vote of thanks.
No, thank you so much, Nidhi. I think it's been an excellent session, and hopefully everybody will go back way more educated on the power of technology and how technology can be a great level of a person with disabilities. But at the same time, also realizing that adopting the right technologies to make sure that they are accessible. With that, I would like to invite maybe Umaji. Nidhi, do you want to give some closing remarks? I mean,
yeah, just wanted to say thank you, each panelist. So Shadi, thank you, Nipun, for your for opening the session. Shadi, Krishna ji, Apurv, and Parag ji, and of course Vikash Prasad ji for coming in and for your thoughts and sharing your presentations, and also very gracefully answering a lot of questions. I think for us, access and leaving no one behind and universal access are the two things that we in our personal lives, if there are individuals and you say, okay, but we don't represent any business or industry, you could probably reflect if go back and see if when you post a podcast, if there's a transcription along with it, if you post an image on Twitter, which is really interesting and funny, and everybody's laughing on the comments if you've sort of image described. So there are ways that each of us could contribute to this universal access and digital access, facilitating digital access for persons with disabilities. Thank you for being so wonderful and joining us on this call. And over to you, Umaji, for the final closing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Nidhi. Thank you so much for moderating this very special session. And thank you to all our esteemed panelists for joining us, all the members of the FICCI Task Force on Diversity and Inclusion. Special thanks to Mr. Vikash Prasad for taking out time and graciously answering all the questions here. The ministry has always been very supportive. And I think one of the key takeaways I feel as a participant is also that, we are all in this together because of the COVID, just like how we are learning, operating all these platforms together, and like we are also learning how accessible each platform is for all of us. And we are learning, and I'm sure for every webinar, we will keep improving the level of accessibility, learn as we go along. So thank you so much for all the patience. There may be some features which are not very accessible. We'll try and improve that for our next webinar. But thank you once again, and thank you so much for all of you joining today to mark this special occasion. And thank you once again, Nipun and Nidhi, for taking the session through today.
I just, sorry, Umaji, I should have wrapped this up before. I just have one request. I'm the founder and executive director of Rising Flame, and we're from today for the next couple of months taking on sort of reaching out and advocating with individual apps and businesses and online platforms to make them more accessible. We have our own list from the community needs assessment that we've done, but if persons with disabilities on this call have specific challenges with particular apps, with, for example, payment gateways to sort of entertainment apps to whichever else, for apps that you engage with in your daily life, we're happy to take those your suggestions in, and do join us and write to us at team@risingflame.org or Nidhi, NIDHI, @risingflame.org. Thank you. Have a lovely day, and we hope to stay connected and see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.